Hello and welcome to Bookplan. In this Quickstart guide we'll introduce you to the basic principles of Bookplan to help you get started on your first book as quickly as possible. This is the interface you'll see when you first start Bookplan. Each partition in this window represents a different control, and we'll go through how to use all of them in the sequence you're most likely to need them in. To get things going, we'll first look at the flow control. That's the long strip up at the top of the interface. The flow lets you define your book's structure in very broad strokes, and so it's perfect for our first steps. We'll start by creating a few chapters. Let's say the book we're writing has a classic 3-act structure. We've got an intro where we introduce the hero and the villain and their conflict. Then we've got a middle part where that conflict plays out over a number of encounters. Finally, we've got the ending where there's some kind of resolution to that conflict. With this structure in mind, we'll start by creating 3 chapters: start, middle, and end. You can do this by clicking the green Add New Chapter button in the flow. Each click will add one chapter, and you'll see them pop up in the flow as these green boxes. You'll also notice that they take up a certain amount of space across, and this is a good time to introduce the length of these elements. You'll see down here on the grey bar that our book has what's called a guide length, measured in number of words. And that's an important part of planning your book. It's set to 80,000 by default, which is a decent length for a book. It's not too short, but it's also no Lord of the Rings or War and Peace. It's what people tend to buy. Having a guide length is an important part of planning because it affects what kind of book you're aiming for, and it helps you keep your pacing on track as you're writing. If you're not reaching your guide length, it means you may not have enough going on in your story and you need to add a few things. And if you're going way over your guide length, you'll probably need to make sure that everything extra you're writing is not distracting from your main story. Again, it's a guide, and at this stage it's very rough. We can always go back and change it later once we have a better idea of what is going on in our story. So we'll leave our book's guide length there, but we do want to adjust how long our chapters should be. And again, that's just a rough guide at this point based on our very first idea for this story. We do know that we want a pretty short intro so we can go straight to the exciting parts, and our ending is also going to be rather short and snappy. We can change the guide length of each chapter by dragging these thick bars at the end left and right, and you'll see a tooltip pop up that shows you the word count of each of these. So we'll drag our intro out to maybe around 5,000 words, like so. And we'll make our ending about 10,000 words. There'll be a bit more going on in there. Then we'll also drag out our middle chapter to fill out the rest of the book. And you can already see that this gives you a very good idea of just how much will need to happen, especially in the middle, to fill out the story. Now let's just name these chapters intro, middle, and ending for now, and then we're good to move on to the next step. You can change the name of any element in Bookplan by double-clicking straight on the name. You'll see the text field change, and then you can just type away. Now that we've got our chapters laid out, let's have a look at the next step down to some finer control over our story. That's where scenes come in. A scene in Bookplan is pretty much the same as a scene in a movie. It's an event or a series of events that generally happen in the same place, at the same time, and involving the same people. So a car chase across the city may be one scene, and if some time after that chase our hero goes out for dinner with their friends, that would most likely be a different scene. The reason for separating these is so that later on we'll have more control over each of these puzzle pieces to reshape our book if we want to. We'll get into that a bit later. For now, we can just think of each scene as a small sub-story of our story as a whole. Scenes live in chapters, and you'll see that each chapter has a little Add New Scene button in the corner. Let's click on that to create some scenes for our intro. This might also be a good time to zoom into the chapter for a more detailed look. You can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and just click drag sideways to scroll. There, now we can see what we're doing, and we already know that we need to introduce both our hero and our villain in our first chapter. And now we're thinking we'd also like to show our hero interacting with the rest of the world for a bit, so that we get a sense of context and we understand what our hero is fighting for. I've laid out 3 new scenes here, and you'll see that they have that same guide length going on as the chapters. You will also have noticed that the chapter itself has expanded as I created those scenes. That's Bookplan's way of making space for the scenes we've just created. The chapter will try to keep the length we've assigned it, but it will adapt if we add more scenes to it, or if, as we're writing the book later on, we end up writing more than we'd originally planned. This way the flow always represents your book in its current state, even if that's slightly different from the plan. At this early stage though, we'll just define roughly how long we want each scene to be, and that will help later when we're writing the book to keep track of our pacing. Let's just name these quickly. And now we'll drag them out in the same way that we did with the chapters. Remember, these are really just rough guides at this point to give ourselves a hint for the pacing of the story later on. We can always go back and change it, and later as we're writing this will actually adjust to what we're writing as well. So for now we're thinking we'll introduce our hero quite quickly, and then we'll just give the reader a quick glimpse of our villain. And then we'll spend the rest of the chapter building the world and building our hero character by showing him interacting with that world. And that's already enough information at this stage. One more thing about the flow control, and this will come in handy later when you're working on your book's structure while you're also writing it, is that you can reorder any of these at any point. If you click and hold on the label of any scene or chapter, you can drag them across. You can even drag scenes into different chapters. So if we decide that we don't want to introduce our villain until the second chapter, we'll just drag that scene over here and drop it. From what we've built so far, you can already get a very good idea of what the flow control is about. It's all about the big picture. It's about the pacing and the structure of your book. You won't see all the fine detail here because it's meant to show you how each scene fits into the bigger context of your whole story, because that's really easy to forget while you're writing. Simply put, the flow makes sure that your story always makes sense and is interesting to read for your audience. Now that we've gotten this far, there's one more step down in Bookplan, and that's story beats. Story beats live inside individual scenes and describe the events that drive your story. And to build these, we'll have a look at this area down here, which is called the workspace. You'll have noticed different items popping up here as we lay down chapters and scenes. Generally, this area will give you a detailed view of whatever you have selected. So let's first select our scene, our hero introduction, and you'll see that now we've got our scene here on the left, and that's the title there, and underneath we've got a blank area. We can create story beats by clicking on this icon here. Story beats describe things that happen, broadly speaking, so each scene should at least have one. You can have more, of course, depending on how much happens in each scene. In this example, we'll start with a single story beat. At the beginning of our story, our hero will just be waking up to a normal day. They're getting out of bed, having breakfast, getting ready for work. You can see that each story beat has a little area on the left for text, so we'll just put our notes in there. And this is where it really depends on your writing style, whether your notes are long or short, bullet points or whole paragraphs, whatever works best for you. This is where all your ideas for your book go. Everything that happens, everything that you need to drive your story from the very beginning to the grand finale. You can also add images here. For example, if you want your hero to wake up to a bright and sunny morning, you can load up a picture of a beautiful sunrise here to give you some ideas as you're writing. Click on the little Polaroid icon to bring up the file browser, and then just pick the image you want to add. You can see the image popping up in the story beat here. You can also add more images, and of course you can reorder them in the same way that you can reorder scenes and chapters. Another thing that story beats do, you might have noticed up here in the flow, each story beat is represented by a little dot. If we create more story beats, more dots will pop up. This is again the flow control, trying to give you a big picture overview of your book, so you'll see which events happen at what point in your story. As you reorder story beats, these dots will update, and if you drag these dots around, you'll see the story beats in your scene updating to reflect that new order. You can also drag these dots up and down to form a narrative plot chart that maps out your story. If you've ever looked into dramatic pacing, you'll know what these charts do. The basic rule is the higher the point on the graph, the more dramatic your story is, the higher the stakes are. The epic finale of your story would be all the way at the top, And leading up to that would be smaller peaks as the stakes are raised and more suspenseful events happen. If you're not familiar with narrative plot charts and how they're used, we highly recommend looking into it. It's a fantastic big picture tool for making sure that your story works, which is exactly what the flow control is all about. As you're filling out your story and building your world, you will need to keep track of all the elements in it. There are characters, there are the factions they belong to, there will be places that we visit in the story. There may be different countries, different planets, wars, romances, there may be aliens or dinosaurs. To build these, we have the library control over here. The library is a collection of notes that you can create by clicking the new note button up here. Let's create a few of them. Just like everything else, you can reorder these and you can label them. And just like with story beats, you can add text descriptions and images to each item. The point of keeping that information here is that you can access it while you're writing, and it will both inspire you to flesh out your story with more detail and help you keep your world consistent. If at the end of the story you're going back to the village you started in, then you don't have to read chapter 1 all over again to remind yourself what it looked like. You just pull up the note and look at your reference pictures. All of these controls are here to help you plan your book, to make sure that you have everything in place, your world makes sense, and your story works as a big picture structure before you start writing away at it. And all of these controls are also there to support you throughout the writing process, to help you keep track of what you should be writing, to help your story along without losing sight of your long-term objectives and your master plan. And that brings us finally to the control that you'll be spending most of your time in, the text editor. You'll notice here in the center of the screen there's a button that says Start Writing. If we click that, we'll open up the currently selected scene for writing. You'll see a blank page right here. You'll take another quick look at the story beats that you've got planned out for this scene, and then you're ready to write your book with the confidence of knowing that you've thought of everything. There is one last control that we need to talk about, and you'll notice this coming to life as you're starting to write your book. Down here at the bottom is what's called the tracking control. Its job is to keep track of how much you're writing every day and how quickly, and that's important because writing a book is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It takes stamina and perseverance, and it's important to set yourself a goal to achieve every day. Most successful writers set themselves a daily word limit, and as long as they hit that target every day, they know that someday soon they'll finish their book. You can see here as we've typed, there's a block with today's date that's tracked how many words we've written. You'll also notice the red line at the top and the red box on the right here. That's the daily word count target that Bookplan lets you set, and it's something that you should use to keep yourself on track. By default it's set to 500 words, which is a very good goal for a part-time writer. Depending on your speed, it will take you 1 to 2 hours of writing to hit that every day. Bookplan will let you know when you've hit your goal for the day so that you can feel good about your daily achievement and relax and return fresh tomorrow. You can set the goal either by typing a number into the box or by dragging the pale red handle on the right side up and down. And that's the full Bookplan UI. It's clean and simple with a few select controls that will really make a difference in the way you plan and write your book. And hopefully it will change the way you work to help you publish sooner and publish better books. Thanks for watching and enjoy writing.